There was no nuclear power industry at all when Rickover got started. He built an entire industry.
My guest today is Marc Wortman. Marc is the recipient of multiple awards for his journalism and has written for Vanity Fair, Smithsonian, Time, Air and Space, and other publications. He's also the author of several award-winning books. His latest book is Admiral Hyman Rickover, Engineer of Power. Known as the father of the nuclear navy, Admiral Hyman George Rickover remains an almost mythical figure in the United States Navy. I recently sat down with Marc and we talked about how Rickover's development of nuclear-propelled submarines and ships transformed naval power and Cold War strategy, which still influence world affairs today. Marc, thanks so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it, and I was really looking forward to it.
Good. Well, thank you, Charles. It's an honor to be here.
All right. So the name of the book, folks, is Admiral Hyman Rickover, Engineer of Power by Marc Wortman. And I want to tell you, first of all, it's a great read. You know, you got this down to like 200 some odd pages in a pretty small, compact book. There's one thing before we even get into it. How come there were no pictures in here?
Yeah. Well, I wish there could have been. So this book is part of a series, Jewish Lives. The series runs everywhere from King David right up to Sigmund Freud, Groucho Marx, Barbara Streisand, Moshe Dayan, various religious leaders. And they all follow a pretty specific format. And unfortunately, that format doesn't permit anything except a cover photo and the photo on the frontispiece.
Yeah.
It's really, but it also keeps price down.
That's
good.
You know,
it's a $26 book.
That's good.
And how many books can you get for $26
I don't know. I buy Kindle, so I really have no idea. But all right, let's get right into it. Admiral Hyman Rickover. Now, this guy is beyond fascinating. He's probably, I think you said, the only person to ever create an energy form. Have I got you right on that? That's what you wrote in the book?
Yes. So if you think across the entire span of human history, you know, you have the myth of Prometheus capturing fire. You have the various inventors who created the steam engine. But really after that, you know, I can't come up with anybody else in history who invented a new form of practical power. And when he took, you know, the kernel of the universe, the atom, and figured out how when you split it and it gives off heat, that you could capture that heat and use it to boil up water and drive a steam engine effectively. There's nobody else in history. It's unbelievable. And yet, how many people even know about Hyman Rickover?
Right. So, you know, I jumped to the gun here because I've been waiting to speak to you, but I'm just going to give a 2-second overview and then you're going to take it from there. Here you have a guy who is just a firecracker, Jewish, got into the Navy in 1918 or so, where there weren't many Jews even able to get into Naval Academy. Had a very tough time of it. He weighs 125 pounds and he's 5 feet 2 inches tall?
A little bit taller than that, but yeah, he was a wisp of a guy.
Yeah. Just finds a way to piss off everybody in the U.S. Navy. But when he leaves, he ushers in the nuclear-powered submarines that many of us take for granted and change the course of warfare and change the course of the Cold War. Is that more or less accurate?
You've encapsulated it well. This was a guy who came into the Navy when the Jews were decidedly not welcome. He made enemies in the Navy everywhere he went. He was a fighter. He was the definition of pugnacious. He battled with the Navy, and he carried out a revolution from inside of it and forced the Navy to come into the 20th century. You know, he used to say, if the Navy had its choice, they'd still be going in sailing ships. And he got them against their will to create a new form of energy to power submarines and nuclear carriers. And as a result, created an entire new level of strategic warfare. Basically, these submarines that are right now at this very instant, 1,000+ feet under the ocean, somewhere on deployment for months at a time. And they are essentially an unstoppable weapon. You know, Putin at the start of his invasion of Ukraine said, you know, I'm gonna put my nuclear forces on alert. Well, Putin may be an evil guy, but he's not one who wants to commit suicide. And as long as our submarines are out there, anybody who would dare to use nuclear weapons would be committing suicide. And during the Cold War, the Soviets couldn't keep up with our submarines. And they attempted to, they spent a fortune. They essentially bankrupted themselves trying to equal American technology.
Okay, so before you keep going, because I guess I just want to, this is something that I had no idea about, and I think many of our listeners don't. Mm-hmm. I want you first, well, there's two things. One is to take the most powerful energy in the world, in the universe, mm-hmm. and encapsulate it into a small area on a ship to power it. That's science fiction. That's what this man did. But before that, tell me submarines prior to Hyman Rickover's brilliance in turning our Navy into having nuclear subs. A sub could only go down for so long and go so fast, and there were just tons of problems and risk factors. So walk us through that. What was submarine warfare like prior to the nuclear subs?
Yeah, that's you're making a great point there, which is that submarines, we think of submarines, if you're old enough to remember Run Silent, Run Deep, you know, submarine warfare in World War II, the U-boats out patrolling against the convoys, the attacks on them, the American submarines that went right into the Japanese harbors and attacked Japanese ships. These were incredibly brave men operating these submarines because they were, in effect, they were surface ships that could submerge. Now, on the surface, they ran on diesel or oil. They charged up batteries. They had these big mattress-sized batteries inside the submarines. And then for short periods, measured in hours, they could submerge and they could go slowly underwater. They could get themselves into an attack position. They could attack and then flee. But they were noisy. They were easily spotted. They were easily killed, which the U-boat commanders eventually discovered once the U.S. could find them in the Atlantic during World War II. But submarine forces on a per capita basis lost more men than any other service branches in the World War II.
And to be on a submarine, it was a volunteer-only position.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a dangerous business. So when you create an energy source,
wait. Before you get into that, let me dwell on this because I didn't appreciate the amazing innovation and how this man changed the nature of warfare, the security of our country. Just really took nuclear energy into the next phase. Or really not the next phase. There was no phase prior. The only phase prior was blowing up stuff. Okay. Yeah. So a submarine, prior to even World War II and prior to that, they were noisy, as you said. They could only submerge, it was 200 some odd feet or so? or a little more?
Around that, probably they could have a test depth closer to 400, 500 feet.
But they couldn't go there that long because the pressure would be enormous and pop the ship. Okay, so now you have that. You have a cylinder underwater going really slow, making a lot of noise. And the only defense they have really is once they shoot their missiles, there was really no defense. Depth charges come, blow them out of the water. And my question is this. When a submarine is under the water, submerged, why does it have to go back up to charge the batteries? And when it's up on top, how vulnerable are they?
Yeah, good question. So when you are underwater, you're running on that battery. The battery charge will exhaust itself, just like our electric vehicles now. So, but they were the equivalent of hybrid vehicles now. They would come back onto the surface. Once on the surface, where you can get oxygen into the motor, so that you can run that motor off of diesel fuel, and that motor is simultaneously charging the battery back up.
Got it.
So that you get enough charge that then you could submerge again when the time came for an attack or to flee.
Okay, now a submarine, just by that definition, had to have a fuel source because they could exhaust their diesel pretty quick. They couldn't go out and stay submerged or at sea for months and months at a time, right? They needed a fuel source to refuel in the middle of the ocean wherever they were, just to keep doing or patrolling or doing whatever they were doing, right?
Yeah. Well, and that was also true of aircraft carriers. So any kind of ship, you had to have either a friendly port where you could put in and refuel, and in the middle of a war situation, you don't know whether you have a friendly port that's going to be available, or you had to have an oiler that could travel alongside of you or come and find you, and then at the speed at which you could continue, transfer oil to the ship, to the submarine that's traveling alongside you.
Okay.
And which in itself is a fairly complicated operation.
Complicated operation in the sense of you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you're in the middle of patrolling and you're out of fuel. You have to call off the patrol, or if you're in the midst of warfare, there's a series of problems when you don't have energy. And they're really, it's like going into a swimming pool, and you can't swim that well. You can only go to the middle for a second and then get reeled back. It's like just swimming away with your hand on the side because your range is so limited due to your fuel source or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, but the submarines in particular still had a pretty fair range with their load of diesel fuel. I mean, they could, if during World War II, German submarines were able to steam across the Atlantic, get right to America's shores, and attack American shipping, and then steam back.
Yeah, but my point is, most of that time it was spent above on the surface.
Absolutely.
So you are extremely vulnerable as a submarine. What do you have, a machine gun on top? There's nothing you can do. You're dead.
They had minimal defenses, and during World War II, once we had aircraft that could reach the mid-Atlantic, German U-boats at that point were in real trouble. And once we had radar to spot them and aircraft to track them down, that was the end of Germany's ability to destroy American shipping going overseas.
Shipping the merchants, the supplies, merchant ships. The Wolfpack was no longer. That was Germany's biggest, one of their biggest psychological threats, as well as economic threats. I don't know how many zillions of tons went to the bottom of the sea because of the Wolfpacks.
Yeah. It was before we were able to take out those Wolfpacks. It was a horrific situation. Nothing more terrifying than being in a convoy going across sea and seeing your comrades blown up on the horizon
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now we have these cylinders that have, how many men are on these ships? 40, 50 on the submarines?
More than that. More than that. A crew of a submarine, or you're talking about
World War
prior
II.
to
World War II.
in World War II, they would have about as many as 120
Oh,
men.
okay. You have 120 men aboard, and you are running slow. Most of the time you're spent on the surface, and all the limitations were it was hot, it was smelly, it was difficult, and you couldn't go down that deep. A whole bunch of issues. Now here's this guy who is he's an engineer by training, and he comes and he upends everything that he draws a new page. His inspiration, from what I learned from you, is he sees the atom and says, we can take this and use it as a fuel source instead of diesel, instead of battery, and have these submarines stay submerged way deeper and way longer on this really seems like magical energy source and give us an amazing edge.
Yeah.
Speak to that.
Yeah. So, first of all, think about the situation when you're coming out of World War II. The concept of nuclear fission is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombs that can incinerate a city. And Rickover is saying we can engineer that same energy source in a controlled way, harness that power, put it inside a vessel, put that vessel or a container, put that container within a hull. This is something that is shooting off radiation at levels that will, if you get exposed to that radiation more than 2 or 3 minutes, your life will be over. And he's saying, we're going to take that, we're going to stick it inside of a hull. That hull is going to be something that is going to be able to submerge, not for hours at a time, but for months at a time. People just thought, well, this is a great idea. Conceptually, we'd of course love to see this, but this is not going to happen. This is fantastical. And if it does happen, it's just going to be a toy. It's not really going to be something that has a practical effect on the Navy, on warfare, on maritime affairs, on strategic affairs. And Rickover, who sort of burned with the fire of the atom, he said, no, not only is this going to happen, this is going to be a practical machine that is going to change the way the Navy works. And he was ready to fight to get that done.
And to put this in perspective, this, at the time, the Cold War is raging. Sputnik was launched. The fear and terror over the United States and the feeling that we were being left behind with this beeping, this basketball-size satellite rotating around our Earth freaked people out. This was going to be our response to Sputnik, in a sense. It turned out to be, but it was so important to our defense and just the psychological makeup of the United States to know that we have something that the Soviets don't in a big way.
Yeah. It was, when we're sort of jumping ahead a little bit here, the United States launched the USS Nautilus in 1954. It went to sea in 55. In the summer of 1958, the Nautilus, at that point, had already set every record for submerged operation.
So let's go through. So the Nautilus is the first nuclear submarine. It's the first one that is, it's not the battery diesel kind of thing. This is the new age. We take nuclear energy manufactured in this steel container in the hull of a submarine with people in tight quarters that if one thing goes wrong, they are dead from radioactivity or it blows up. A whole bunch of a zillion issues. Just throw out to me some amazing records that the Nautilus is able to accomplish.
Well, if we can reel it back just a little bit, just to think about what it took to build that reactor. So there was no nuclear power industry at all when Rickover got started. He built an entire industry. Just to tell you one example of what he had to accomplish, the United States had about 86 pounds of zirconium, refined zirconium, when he started work. You know, we think about these zirconium bracelets and all the other things that are made out of zirconium now. Zirconium, it turns out, is very good for shielding against radiation. Rickover needed tons. He needed tons of zirconium. And he needed it within a year and a half in order to build his reactor in the time frame he set for getting it done. He set up an entire new industry that was able to take zirconium that had previously cost $3,000 a pound and reduce the cost to $5 a pound, and to produce tons of it so that he could make his reactor.
And when you say reactor, not only for the submarine, you're basically saying any nuclear reactor we have now that is producing energy throughout the world was all from the brilliance of Admiral Rickover?
Everything that has derived since in the nuclear power industry came directly out of what Hyman Rickover did during about a 5-year period in the early 1950s.
I read that in your book, and I'm saying to myself, first of all, I just put the book down. I said, it's not only unbelievable, it's that it's one of those things that if you told me, okay, I knew who Admiral Hyman Rickover was, father of nuclear sub, that's all I really knew. But the way you present it as a creator of energy and everything that started there, we're the result of everything that throughout the world, all the nuclear reactors, everything. The whole concept of using nuclear energy was this man's brilliance in a small window of time by a guy who was so hated by so many because he knew how to push everyone's buttons. And I think you're right that his goal every day was to make enemies, not friends. He just went out of his way to piss people off. And he pissed the chain of command off. He pissed the Navy off. Just as an aside, he wore a suit instead of a Navy uniform. And everything that we have is because of his brilliance. Do I have that right?
I think that's quite fair to say that. Of course, over the years, there have been many changes, advances in the science, in the engineering. Prior to Rickover, there were the beginnings of efforts to make nuclear reactors. The Navy itself had an early program investigating the possibilities. It was put on hold during World War II. The first nuclear reactor was built underneath the stands of the University of Chicago football stadium by Enrico Fermi in 1943. But this thing was as big as a house, and you're thinking about reducing it down, making it safe. Rickover said, I have a son. I love my son. I want my nuclear reactor to be safe enough that my son can go on one of these submarines and be safe. That was his basic philosophy. And that was a really important philosophy in itself. These are, reactor is potentially incredibly dangerous. We've seen that at Chernobyl. We've seen that most recently in Japan with the tsunami.
3 Mile Island, we saw it as well.
And 3 Mile Island going back. And Rickover said it is essential that the sailors who are on board these ships be safe. And it's not just for the sake of their lives, as important as that is, it's also because as soon as we create something that people perceive as too dangerous to come into their ports, it starts to lose value. American, in the almost 70 years since the creation, the launch of the USS Nautilus, the United States Navy has operated nuclear reactors under the most harrowing conditions, 1,000 feet plus under the sea, on surfaces where 50-foot waves are breaking, and in operating millions of miles and millions of hours of reactor time, and there has never been a nuclear accident.
Astounding.
In the Navy. We presently, people don't realize this, the Navy presently operates 98 nuclear reactors. It's the largest nuclear reactor operator in the world. And there have never been any accidents in those. And that's because Rickover created a submarine force and a nuclear navy for which both safety and quality and training were paramount.
So I'm looking up here. We have 71, I hope my data is right, 71 nuclear subs.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound about right to you?
It does. We also have 11, I believe it's 11 nuclear carriers. We also have multiple training reactors.
No, but before you even get into that, I want to put into our listeners, give context to this. The United States has 71 nuclear subs. Russia has 33. UK has 11. France has 10. China has 3. India has 2. So if you add up second, third, fourth, and fifth place, I don't do 3, 4, 50. You add them all up and then some, they don't even equal to what we have.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most amazing weapons at our disposal, as you can tell us and share with us more. I think it was the Nautilus that went in 1954, so it went under the polar caps.
Yes,
that
was in August 1958. So you spoke about Sputnik.
Yeah.
So the Soviet Union had launched a satellite into orbit, and what immediately created a moment of sheer terror within the United States was this idea that suddenly they could potentially launch nuclear weapons by rocket into Europe, into the United States, against our allies. And of course, we're going through that now with North Korea, and that the potential for that to happen. Well, our answer was under President Dwight Eisenhower, was to send the Nautilus to make the transit from Alaska to Greenland under the polar ice, something that had been dreamed of, had never been accomplished before.
Mark, hang on a second. Hang on. Why? I want you to expand on that. First of all, how deep is that?
At points under the ice, there it goes. It can go as much as 3,000 feet deep, but the real danger is that the ice varies in thickness, and there are jagged points that can come down, and if you're sailing too close to the ice under the water there and hit it, it could cause serious, even irreparable harm.
That was a Titanic, right? so
it was as big a deal in its way as sending a man to the moon.
Okay, now that's how amazing this, from just a few years earlier, where they were going no more than 300 to 400 feet deep. Well, really I think 400 was really stretching it. That's when you had the most pressure. So let's call it, these things were operating at 300 feet at best. So in just a few years, you're now going 1,000 feet plus under a place that no one on planet Earth has ever gone below, which is beneath the polar caps. And could you just share with us why that shook the Soviets in their boots, the geographic location from North Pole, Greenland?
Yeah. So what that means is that this undetectable, essentially undetectable vessel can go under the ice and go right up to the northern shores of the Soviet Union, where the Soviet Union has their major bases for their Navy.
And they didn't hear a sound. They would never have picked up any of this.
Yeah, yeah. So there, you can bring an American vessel carrying torpedoes at that point, potentially special operations forces, and most significantly, what it pointed to was eventually we were going to be able to load missiles onto these submarines. And these submarines could, if they are at that point within range of the Soviet population centers or military bases, those missiles then provide a strategic threat to the Soviet Union. So this became our answer to Sputnik, and the potential for it basically ended the idea that one side could launch a first strike against us, and when the Soviets got their own submarines, that we could launch a first strike against them. Although we could talk about it. I've talked to many submarine captains who've told me we knew where they were. They didn't know where we were. But it created the third leg of the triad, land, sea, and air, that assured the deterrence.
So now you have, this happens, what you said, 1958, Nautilus. I think it even surfaced in New York, I think. I remember seeing something to that effect, the Nautilus.
Well, after the transit of the North Pole, which electrified the world, there was a celebration or an announcement that took place at the White House. And here's we talked about the hatred of Rickover. Well, so everybody who was associated with making this happen, except for the one guy who truly made it possible, was invited to the White House for this big announcement. Rickover is not brought in, and later on, I read that the acting chief of naval operations, who at that time specifically did not invite Rickover because he hated the man. He said, "If I ever catch Rickover in a dark alley, it's going to be a knife fight."
Right.
Well, this was his knife fight,
right?
And he didn't invite Rickover. Well, Rickover was a political animal. He knew he had people who would back him to the hilt. They just happened not to be in the Navy. They were in Congress. Congress got wind of this. Congress went bananas. They gave him a second gold medal, the second person in all of United States history to get a congressional gold medal. The White House, because of the politics that were blowing up on them, they gave him a second star, made him increased his rank, his admiral rank. And then Eisenhower designated him as his personal representative to the parade celebrating the Nautilus. It sailed into New York Harbor to big fanfare. They had a parade down down Broadway, the Avenue of the Heroes there, and Rickover was in the lead car as the White House's personal representative. 250,000 people along there screaming out, "Way to go, Ricky!" And he turned, as he often did, he turned what was looked like a real debacle for him personally. He turned it into a triumph.
Yeah, it just seems, I don't want to go into every detail of that, but yeah, this guy, it looked like always the end of his career, and he served 63 years in the United States Navy?
Yeah, yeah.
Has
He
anyone even
served,
come close?
so Omar Bradley of World War II fame was on duty longer, had a Navy career, rather an Army career, as long as Rickover's Navy career. But unlike Bradley, Rickover actually served from the time he got into the Navy, into the Naval Academy in 1918 under Woodrow Wilson, so the end of the First World War, through to the beginnings of the end of the Cold War under Ronald Reagan, 63 years to 1981. It's a longer stretch of actual active duty service than any military officer in United States history.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing. And
Yeah.
one thing that many people don't know, even if people do know about Admiral Hyman Rickover, one of his famous officers went to the heights of power.
Yeah. Well, a number of them did. A number of them did.
Well, only one sat in the Oval Office.
Only one sat in the Oval Office. That's right. So Jimmy Carter was a nuclear-trained submarine officer. He was, back in the early 1950s, he's one of the earlier nuclear-trained officers. He was bound for being an executive officer on a submarine when his father died. And so he resigned his commission at that point. But he had, Rickover was famous for his interviews of candidates to become nuclear officers. They were very tough interviews. And some people reacted badly to them. Carter came away from it when Rickover asked him, did you always do your best? And Carter, who was a very earnest fellow, realized, he said, no, I hadn't. And Rickover said to him, why not? And that became the basis for Carter's campaign autobiography called Why Not the Best? And Carter said that no man had greater influence on his life than Rickover. And when Carter got to the White House, even before he got to the White House, I ran into some notes that Carter wrote to him. I found them in an archive, saying before he ran for, even announced that he was running for office when he was governor of Georgia, and he invited Rickover to be an advisor. And Rickover actually didn't really even remember Carter, but Carter said, you had more influence on me than anyone other than my father. But Rickover, once Carter got to the White House, he was welcomed in the Oval Office anytime. He served as a confidant, an advisor, something of a mentor. Carter even went over to Rickover's apartment to celebrate his birthday there. He went out on one of Rickover's submarine and said, this is the greatest engineering triumph in human history.
No, it's just, by the way, folks, the book is around 250 some odd pages. I'm not even doing it justice because we didn't even speak that much about what type of person Hyman Rickover was, the adversity he faced, the management style he had, the perseverance, the persistence, having everyone chomping at his feet, trying to destroy him, and he just persevered. We didn't even get into that, so that's why I want you to buy the book. But what strikes me so is when I read this, is how much I didn't know about nuclear energy, nuclear reactors, the amazing leap in a 5-6 year period from nuclear energy being a dream, from being from a destructive. Oppenheimer? What did he say? I am.
The destroyer of worlds. Yes.
Yeah, a destroyer of worlds, to a destroyer of worlds, to where Rickover saw something that even people today are, Europe mostly, and the problem is if they have nuclear energy, they wouldn't be in the situation they're in now, worrying about you getting oil and gas from the Russians. But the safety of it and the ability to transform energy in a way that nothing has ever done, nothing has ever will be done, a cheap, efficient way to control that. People are freaking out 75 years later Now, I just can't even imagine in the shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, anyone saying, let's take this and put it into a small container, relatively, and put it in a tightly packed submersible and keep them there and put people around them. It's, you think about it that way, it's just, you got to be crazy. If someone told you that, you'd think they're talking science fiction. You're talking Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, people in the Navy started calling the first commander of that Rickover designated for the Nautilus. They started calling him Captain Nemo in a derogatory way because they didn't believe that this stuff was going to happen.
That's amazing. Look, the first submarine is called the Nautilus, right after Jules Verne. So it's just, I want to tell you, Mark, you did an amazing job here because the book is long enough to include everything, but not short enough to leave you wanting more. You have tremendous amount of footnotes in here, which I love, really notes in the back here. How long does this take you to research? My gosh, how many archives do you have to go through to do? It will just take you several years?
It did. It was a 3-year project from start to finish. It involved going to archives scattered around Navy archives at the Submarine Force Museum, Naval War College, the Navy Department Library in Washington, the National Archives. But it ended up being a labor of love. I started this knowing sort of that basic thing, father of the nuclear Navy. But what I didn't know was what it took to become the father of the nuclear Navy. And that's in fact why I called it engineer of power instead of father of the nuclear Navy, because this was a guy who didn't just engineer a technology. He engineered an entire industry. He engineered an entire political environment. He engineered an entire educational setup to make it possible to have.
Can I add one more thing? He engineered something which the Navy was considered, I think you wrote in time of Truman or Eisenhower, why did you need a Navy anymore? They're outdated. Put nuclear bombs and through the Air Force. The Air Force is going to be at the Navy. Let's fade it out.
Yeah, exactly. That after World War II, it was not clear what in a world with atomic bombs, the role of the Navy could be. And because you couldn't put atomic bombs on airplanes flying off a carrier deck. And
why is that? Why is that? They're too heavy, right? Is that?
They're too heavy. They're massive. They're gigantic. And then just think about the idea of carrying an atomic bomb within a ship.
Yeah.
You hit that with a conventional warhead. Just think about what you would do. So it was. It really wasn't clear what role the Navy was going to have when the Air Force took command of our strategic warfare resources.
Yeah, it just before I let you go, I want you. The movie, I think it was Crimson Tide.
Hunt for Red October.
No, it was. I think it was Crimson Tide I'm talking about, where you could have a. I don't know if this was fiction or not. Maybe I'm confusing my movies. I think it was which one was with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington? That was Crimson Tide. Right, the first one, the Hunt for Red October, was with Sean Connery, where they were searching for the Soviet, the rogue ship. Now, in Crimson Tide, I don't know how true this is, and I want you to share this and give me your insight. It seemed, just the premise, the quick beginning of it, without talking too much about the movie, is there is unrest in the Soviet Union at that moment. This submarine is going down. They surface to get orders, and the orders are to launch a nuclear strike. But before they get all the codes or whatever, the confirmation of it, the antenna is knocked off. And the whole tension of the movie is, do we follow orders and shoot first strike with nuclear weapons? from the submarine, or do we wait and reestablish contact and confirm? And that was Gene Hackman was the Navy guy, and Denzel Washington was the XO. My question is, and I don't know if you could answer this or not, was that like just for movie's sake, or do captains of nuclear submarines have a first launch capability?
Do they have, so in other words, can they launch without orders?
Or they get orders, are they able to, is there any safeguard? Because I remember the movie made it seem, and this could be Hollywood, that a rogue captain of a nuclear sub, without any orders other than word from the president, I'm not sure for what it was, but they said they changed it, so I'm not 100% sure how much of a Hollywood is. How much, let me rephrase the question and strike everything I've said. How much power does a captain of a nuclear sub have to launch nuclear weapons? How does that work?
Now, I don't know the specific sequences, but no individual on their own can give the order to launch. There has to be multiple individuals who concur to launch any kind of nuclear weapon. This is true land, sea, and air. As far as, this of course is, if you think about any number of Hollywood films, going back, Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove.
Right.
This is always the fear that there is some kind of automated or otherwise uncontrolled launch of strategic weapons. Nobody in and of him or herself has the ability to do that.
I guess there was an article back, this is 1986, I'm looking up here, that there was an article by an Australian scholar that was quickly, I see here, disavowed by the Navy, which said that U.S. submarine commanders under some conditions can fire nuclear weapons without presidential permission, creating a situation where an atomic clash would likely begin at sea. And then the Navy responded that all nuclear weapons are carefully controlled and no ship or submarine captain can launch or fire a nuclear weapon without specific authorization from the National Command Authority, which is the president or his successor if he's disabled. So I guess this was Hollywood at its taking that and making a scary movie.
There are specific codes that have to be transmitted to the site, and then even at that point, the individual captain cannot make the decision to launch without the concurrence of other officers on board.
Right. Yeah. In the movie was he was threatening the other officers with a gun to their head, with the launch code. But then again, it was once again Hollywood at its best.
There is every reason to worry about the proliferation of these weapons, but the worry is not that in some rogue individual within the Navy, Air Force will make the decision unilaterally. I'm going to start a nuclear war. That's not going to happen. But simply by virtue of having so many of these weapons, you create a situation in which there, accidents of one form or another are always within the realm of possibility.
Before I let you go, I'm just gonna I look this up because this totally fascinates me, and all that you did, you started me thinking about nuclear subs and the technological marvel that they are. Nuclear subs can operate underwater for 3 to 4 months at a time and easily span seas. And this was coming from right before that. You just said a few hours, right? Back in World War II or so. So you 3 to 4 months, and you said it's a couple hundred feet, 200, 300, 400 feet, maybe max. Now they can go down as far as 300 meters, 984 feet. And
they can go deeper than that.
deeper than that. So this is an old article here. It's amazing. Yeah, deeper than that. Okay, I'm sure the Navy's not going to tell us exactly how deep they can go. And I'm looking here, the speeds they can get up to speeds of
They can go 30 knots.
Yeah, 35. Yeah,
Yeah.
attack submarines.
Most of this stuff is classified.
Yes, I'm sure they're not going to put on the web for me to see.
Yeah, but what actually the Soviet Union invested phenomenal amounts of money to build titanium submarines that could go incredibly deep, much deeper than our submarines, which don't have that capability. But that was fool's gold. That was money wasted, because their titanium submarines are so noisy. We knew exactly where they were.
Right.
So and you want to see something that's truly a comparison basis. Go look up the record of accidents within the Soviet and Russian Navy, nuclear accidents, and compare that to the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, I think there were 7 or 8 or something in the Soviet and the Russian, and we had 0.
Yeah.
We had 0. Just amazing.
And that doesn't even count the sailors. These Russian submarines are notorious for radiation leaks that may not kill people immediately, but where they have to rotate sailors out so often because they're getting overexposed to nuclear radiation.
Amazing.
And they can't. Their health starts to deteriorate.
Right.
I mean, it's an awful situation for their Navy,
Right.
and speaks worlds to what Rickover accomplished, because that's because of Hyman Rickover.
Amazing. All right. So, by the way, just to extend on that, an immigrant who came to this country barely at 6 years old with his mom, and they almost had to go back from Ellis Island, and here he is, and it creates it's just amazing what he creates with all the adversity against him. So, folks, the name of the book is Admiral Hyman Rickover, Engineer of Power, by Marc Wortman. I highly, highly suggest this book. I read this book. It's about 200 some odd pages. I read it all yesterday, Mark, and I wanted this fresh. And I'm going through this, and you start with this book, and you just think of context and so many things that you bring up, and I don't even want to go into it. Buy the book, folks. There are so many little tidbits of knowledge in here of what kind of brilliant guy this man was in terms of work ethic, in terms of honesty, in terms of getting what he wanted, sometimes really just walking the tightrope of being legal. But he got it done. He took initiative. This is called moxie. This is called grit.
Yeah. He or chutzpah.
Chutzpah. Nothing better than that. Nothing better. Mark, continued success to you, and fantastic book. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Charles, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Charles Mizrahi Show. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you've been listening for a while, we're glad to have you back. Either way, we'd love to know what you think of the show. Please leave a review if you listen on Apple Podcasts. Reviews make it easier for others to find the show. You can also see the video of the interview on the Charles Mizrahi Show channel on YouTube.